Hello, everyone. This is the 225th episode of Soccer Nostalgia Talk Podcast. As always, this is Sean from Los Angeles and the Soccer Nostalgia blog. For this episode, I interview Dutch football fan Mr. René Seedorf as we discuss the career of the Argentine manager José Néstor Pékerman. Mr. Sedorf is a teacher, translator, aspiring scout, and an avid collector of classic football matches. Welcome, Renee.
Thank you, Shahan. Thanks for having me.
Can you introduce yourself and your trajectory into football?
Well, as you've already said, I'm interested. I've always been interested in football. I'm a football fan, and I started out playing the game as a 7-year-old at grassroots level. I more or less played on with some patches of inactivity until 31. Then I decided to quit due to injury. Then I went on as a goalkeeper coach. I always used to be a goalkeeper. I forgot to mention that, but I always used to be a goalkeeper. 7 years. I did that for about 7 years. And now I'm one of the assistant coaches of my son's under 17 team. So it's all at amateur level just because we love the game. That's really my idea. And well, that's how I ended up following part of the career of the man we're going to talk about today.
Let's introduce Jose Nestor Pekerman. What can you say about his beginnings and his playing career in the 1970s and his transition into management into the 1980s?
Let's start off with his beginnings. He started his playing career being born in 1949. He started his playing career at Argentinos Juniors. He had a modest career, and that's quite difficult to say because he managed to play at the highest level in Argentina, which is no small feat considering the fact that, well, Bosman didn't exist in his playing days. So you had to be quite a player to do that, but he was never in contention. That is, according to my research, he was never in contention for a spot in the national team. You're inclined to say that his career was quite modest. Well, he played in Argentina, then he went on to Colombia. He had a small period there. He did quite all right, but knee injury forced him to quit at 28, 27, 28. After a brief period, a brief stint as a taxi driver, he came into coaching due to the coach who gave him the opportunity to star in the first team, in Argentino Juniors first team. And that was a man by the name of Ricardo Trigili. Gave him a chance as a professional football player, and he also encouraged him to become a coach in his coaching staff at both Chacarita Juniors and Argentinos Juniors. He was quite an unknown entity in Argentinian football, despite being a coach at Argentinos Juniors, which is, as most football fans know, is, well, more or less a factory, has an assembly line of good, cultured players who made it into the national team, who made a name for themselves internationally. World Cup level, Champions League level, you name it. So, yeah, that's where he made a name for himself, and he managed to convince Grondona in 1994 when Grondona was looking for a coach who could be put in charge of the national teams, youth setup
And let's
in
remind everyone
Argentina.
that Julio Grondona is the president of the Argentinian
Yeah,
Football Association.
correct. He was preferred, was chosen instead of seasoned coaches such as Senor Grigol, yeah, who was a well-respected coach in Argentina, having coached at top flight level, which could not be said of Peckerman. But Peckerman, he presented a project. He wanted to, he instilled a certain style of playing, and in doing so, he wanted to maintain, well, a style that was characteristic of how Argentinian teams played. And that's what we saw throughout his period, his era as head coach of the national youth teams, under
Yeah.
20 in particular.
And he had managed youth level players in his coaching career, so maybe that spoke in his favor when
Yeah,
being appointed for the youth teams of Argentina.
I think that is part of why they desired or why they wanted him to take up the helm as youth coach? Well, research told me that he more or less foresaw a certain development. Football was globalizing fast. 1994, we just had the World Cup in the United States, whereas previously World Cup tournaments were mostly carved up between or organized by either a European nation or a South American nation, with Mexico being the odd exception. And the United States was the first one outside that category to organize, if I'm not mistaken, to organize such a well-known event that attracted viewers worldwide. So yeah, football was becoming a global issue, and he tried to answer that from his perspective in Argentina by saying, well, let's secure these players before they move out, before they go to Europe or other continents to display their talents, and put them in a certain kind of setup. Well, trying to help them understand what football means in Argentina, what becoming a professional player actually means. Let's try to educate them in that game and as a person.
What was the status of the Argentine youth football program prior to Peckerman's appointment?
It was quite questionable because during the World Youth Cup in 1991, things had, well, gone wrong, really. The World Cup was held in Portugal. Argentina played one game against Portugal, and quite a few players were sent off. Well, to give you an impression of the players who participated, there were quite a few well-known players among them.
Right. And then one Snyder. I know he was there.
Yeah, he was there. Juan Snyder and Mauricio Pochettino was
All
also
right,
there.
right.
He also played in that team. The team was coached by Mostaza Merlo, if I'm not mistaken, one of Basile's assistants. But yeah, everything went south. FIFA was prompted or was felt forced to suspend Argentina from participating in the next tournament, next under 20 tournament in Australia. So you could say that the reputation was quite questionable.
And the only success at that point had been the 1979 tournament. That's how Maradona was introduced to the world.
Yeah.
As far as Peckerman, what was his coaching philosophy at this point, and how did he implement it upon taking over?
His approach was, you could say that, first of all, he showed that he had faith in the players he chose. He knew what they were capable of, but he didn't necessarily follow the headlines saying which players were top talents. He scoured the country for talent. He chose the players he wanted to include. At some point, there's a short on YouTube of him saying that he had incorporated players who were even unknown entities. They were even unknown to the club directors, those in charge of the clubs they played for. I don't know whether that is somewhat far fetched because I can't imagine a manager or a club president not being aware of potential talents. But that's what he said. So he more or less looked at players and he tried to find a way to incorporate them into his idea of in his tactical ideas. And what I saw from the games I watched, he always looked for a combination. So first there is defensive solidity, and he also wanted to look for creativity in attack. But that's, well, I would almost say that that is an integral part of any Argentinian team, that they always want to be creative up front. They have some kind of solidity at the back. Sometimes they overdo that by playing quite ruthlessly, and trying to stifle the opponent at any opportunity. But that's what he looked for. What stood out for me is that he would always incorporate two classical positions. Those are the number 5 and the number 10. Examples of players who occupied the former position were Esteban Cambiaso and later on Javier Mascherano.
And the number 5 is the midfield sentinel,
Yeah,
basically.
that's the central midfielder. To Europeans, it's always good to note because in South America, that is the midfield playmaker, really, from the back, orchestrating play. We know the likes of, well, in Argentina in particular, we know the likes of Redondo,
Or
Cambiaso,
Americo Gallego, if you go back.
Gallego,
Yeah.
Gallego, yeah.
Yeah.
So quite a few players who made a name for themselves there. And especially in Argentinian football, number five is, well, almost as important as the number 10 position. Number 10, well, I don't think I need to elaborate on that because, well, we've seen a host of number 10, so I'm not going to delve into that.
Peckerman was successful right from the starting gate as Argentina won the 1995 Under 20 World Cup in Qatar. This is a team, some of the familiar names included Juan Pablo Sorin, among others, like Leonardo Biagini, Ariel Ibagaza, who'll be playing in Europe. Can you summarize this victory and these future stars and Peckerman's role in this first win?
Before I say this, I also tried to do some research because I know that the captain of that team, Juan Pablo Sorin, he made a documentary about this tournament once upon a time in Qatar. My Spanish is not that good, but the title was something like this, Érase una vez en Qatar. But I have never been able to watch that documentary. I even approached him online, but well, he didn't reply. So I had to rely on my own findings. Well, I I checked the technical reports issued by FIFA after each tournament. FIFA spoke, or the technical report spoke of a gradual improvement. So a genuine team effort. They even played against the Netherlands in the group phase and Portugal. They defeated the Netherlands thanks to a stoppage time victory. They finished second behind Portugal, having lost against Portugal. Well, you should check it on YouTube if you have the chance, because Dani, who'd play for Ajax later on, he scored a stunning goal against Portugal, bypassing three or four Argentine defenders, slotting it home very quietly. Well, they won their final game against Honduras, and the end score was 4-2, so they won 4-2. So they had to concede. They conceded three goals in the group phase, but those were the only three goals they would concede in the entire tournament, because in the quarterfinal against Cameroon, semi-final against Spain, and the final against Brazil, they kept clean sheets. That exemplifies the defensive solidity, you could say. Their level, the level at which they played, the fluency of their game, it improved. And what I saw in the final, it was a well-deserved win against Brazil that consisted of players such as Denilson, Zelias, who was in contention of a 98 World Cup squad, Luizao. So quite a few players who would actually make it into the major team of Brazil. And like you said, the Argentina team was known as a cohesive unit rather than a team that had some outstanding individual talents. Juan Sorin, who played the tournament as a central defender, those who know him from his later days, they always saw a wingback. But during that tournament, he was a central defender, and he even had the number that belonged to a central defender, being number six. So, yeah, that speaks for how Peckerman viewed his team and speaks for the responsibility he instilled in a player such as Juan Sorin.
Yeah, and looking at the lineup, I'm trying to remember Mariano Juan. He also played for Ajax, didn't
He
he?
played for Ajax. Well, he didn't last that long. He wasn't that
Right.
successful either. He had difficulty adapting into a team that was in transition. Because if I'm not mistaken, they wanted to sign him as successor to Denny Blind, he was a central defender, known for his positional play, who would always be able to provide a good first pass forward from the back. So he was instrumental, and but Juan was never able to succeed him and to make a name for himself at Ajax. Sometimes these things happen, but that's really the blind spot why many of these players at the 1995 crop didn't really make it into top flight football, with the exception of the players you mentioned, Ibagaza, Sorin, and Biagini.
In contrast, this 1997 squad has so many players who would have good careers in Europe. Now,
Yeah,
this 1997 under 20 victory was even more impressive than the 1995 one. This one was in Malaysia. Just reading of some of the players, you have Walter Samuel, Esteban Cambiaso as the number 5, Riquelme, Aymar, Placente. Scaloni.
Scaloni, of course.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, so many and others like Leandro Cufre, Leo Franco, the goalkeeper. Many
Yeah.
of these players would make a breakthrough into the national team. How was this victory different than the 1995 one?
Well, first of all, the players that stood out, because with youth squads, you would always have to say how many players will make it into the top flight teams, into the national team. Well, judging from this, there's quite a few who actually made it into that tournament. And I remember because back in the day, you had Football Mondial. It's a program, 30 minutes, which
Yeah, I
showed
remember it.
football
Yeah,
from all
yeah.
around the world. I remember Peckerman saying that, well, 1995 was a team effort, and he was really proud of them for achieving that. But 1997 was brimmed with individual talents who stood out, some of whom had already made their mark in the Argentinian top flight divisions. So he knew what they were capable of. For instance, Esteban Cambiaso moved to Real Madrid at 16. He knew what these players were worth. Well, you could say that showed in the future careers they would have. It was a team, and it was a team effort. They had to fight at times. For instance, the final was a real battle against Uruguay. They didn't always dominate their opponents, but they always had the opportunity to break through. In hindsight, it's quite interesting to see the final scoreline after conceding the 1-0 by courtesy of Pablo Garcia free kick. Placente scored the equalizer, and he is now in charge of the under 20s and even under 17. The current head coach, Lionel Scaloni, set up the decider.
Right, for Quintana. Quintana scored
Quintana scored the deciding goal, but he was involved in that second goal, and they were successful. But well, of course, the players who stood out and who would become instrumental in both on both club level and national team level, being Pablo Aimar, Walter Samuel, Cambiaso, and oh no, Cambiaso scored the first one. I'm sorry, Cambiaso scored the first one. I thought Placenta, but it was Cambiaso, of course. They were instrumental. That's quite remarkable to see
Yeah,
in hindsight.
and we should mention they also defeated Brazil in the quarterfinals.
Yeah,
They defeated England in the second round.
yeah.
And interestingly, I think Michael Owen was in the England team. I could be
Michael Owen
wrong.
was in
And
England.
in
Yeah,
fact, Jamie Carragher
Jamie
scored
Carragher.
England's goal. Yeah.
Yeah, correct, correct. Yeah,
Yeah.
it was quite an interesting tournament because France also participated in that tournament.
Oh,
Well,
yeah. Thierry Henry
yep, Thierry
and
Henry,
Trezeguet. Yeah. Yeah.
Anelka. So it was a tournament that was quite interesting to follow, worth watching, and in
Yeah.
hindsight,
Come to
one
think
can
of it,
say,
so many players became
yeah,
stars
yeah,
in that tournament. However, the 1999 edition would be a disappointing one.
yeah,
Argentina were eliminated. You still had Esteban Cambiaso in the team and others like Aldo Ducher. It was not the same crop of talent as, and Gabriel Milito, among others, yeah, but not the same crop of talent as you had in 1997. Do you
correct.
think this, in a way, weakened Peckerman's position, or his work spoke for itself at this point?
I think his work spoke for himself. I mean, in South America, he'd also won South American tournament under 20 in both in 1997, yeah, and
Yeah.
1999, which was held in Argentina, the latter one talking about. So he'd made quite a name for himself, and the reputation Argentina had amassed by then, also winning fair play cups. And that, of course, is quite an improvement from the,
Right,
well,
because discipline was always an issue
yeah,
from, yeah.
yeah. Discipline was also always part of Argentina's conduct. That was quite an improvement from what happened earlier that decade. Peckerman made a name for himself, and that's what made me follow him, really. Because, well, back in 1995, you could hardly rely on any online resources, but that was growing by the end of the decade. So I remember looking or following, trying to follow the 1999 under 20 tournament in South America, the Copa America, going on the internet and trying to follow what happened. So that's how I found out more about Peckerman and how he guided the boys and led his teams. To me, that was always quite fulfilling. Well, it told me something about the kind of man he was. I mean, I'm not idolizing him, but was quite a remarkable man. Yeah, quite a remarkable man. He had a plan and he followed through.
He signed off his under 20 tenure with a brilliant victory in the 2001 edition.
Yeah,
The star of this team was Javier Saviola, who would join Barcelona, Real Madrid. I think there's a competition to say which team was better, the 1997 one or this 2001, because you have other big names on this team like Nicolas Burdisso, Mauro Cetto, Fabrizio Colaccini, of course, Saviola, Maxi Rodriguez,
correct.
Andres D'Alessandro. This team also is packed with talent, and they were so impressive in
Yeah,
this 2001 tournament. And many were tipping Saviola to be the next Argentinian great at this point. If you just look at the scores, they defeated Egypt 7-1, Jamaica 5-1, France, they defeated France 3-1, Paraguay 5-0, and of course they defeat Ghana 3-0 in the finals. So they were just simply unstoppable in this 2001 edition.
yeah, correct, correct. Well, it was a go-between when you look at how they played. By then, Bielsa was, of course, in charge of the national team. Pékerman was still in charge of the under 20. When I look at that team, it was much more dynamic. They tried to place a high press, and, well, in possession, they were always looking for forward options. They followed through, scoring 27 goals, winning all matches, and only conceding four. In terms of figures, that's downright impressive. Well, you mentioned Saviola. They burdened him, I would say, by saying, well, you are going to do great things comparable to Diego Maradona. And that is, of course, the fate of many players who had something of Maradona. But I mean, Maradona was a class of his own, even compared to Messi. Messi is great, is wonderful, but Maradona was something special. By then, Messi was not in contention of anything because he was only 14 years old. But what Saviola, I remember Cruyff comparing him in some way in his nimbleness, in his movements. Cruyff compared him to Raul. I think that is much more appropriate than trying to, or comparisons made to Maradona. But anyway, well, Saviola, well, he played for Barcelona, he played for Real Madrid, he also played for Monaco, and he
Right.
made a name for himself during the 2006 World Cup in Germany, scoring a few goals and setting up a few, especially against Serbia and Montenegro. But, well, he didn't really live up to the almost insurmountable expectations placed on him after that tournament.
What
So,
were
yeah.
the reasons that Peckerman left his post after the 2001 victory? Did he feel that perhaps he had gone as far as he could?
I'm inclined to think so. I mean, he went on to work as a manager of the national teams. He would be in charge. So Hugo Tocali, for instance, took up the helm of the under 20 team. He left in 2003. Beckerman himself left in 2003 to work in Spain because he was contacted by a businessman called Daniel Grimank. But the project turned out to be a failure, and he worked at the Leganés, but he would leave before long. That was really it because, well, despite the ambitions, the project didn't turn out to be the success Beckerman believed it would become. Yeah, he left in 2003 after, well, leaving the manager position, not necessarily being in charge of one particular team, but he oversaw developments at AFA.
Given his successes with the under 20 team, was it considered a formality that he would become the national team manager at some point?
He was one of the candidates, but not necessarily the popular choice, if I'm correct. When looking at his career, we followed his career now. We've been discussing his career now from the beginnings, his beginnings as a player and youth coach. Then he was in charge of the national teams, youth teams. So one could draw the conclusion that he had never done any top flight coaching. He had never been in charge of any major team based on the information we've collected. So would he be the popular choice? Not necessarily. But he was in contention he was competing with Carlos Bianchi, the all successful, all winning coach of Boca, and winning Copa Libertadores titles and even a world title, defeating Real Madrid in 2000. But Carlos Bianchi declined. That's why Peckerman was, well, the most suitable or eligible candidate. And that's why he took up the job in September following Bielsa's resignation. I've always found that quite peculiar because Bielsa had just won the Olympics,
Right. It's like a
winning
month
all,
after winning it. Yeah.
yeah, winning all matches, defeating all opposition without conceding one single goal. I've always found that quite peculiar to, well, first achieve that and then say, well, okay, let's stop here. It was always, yeah, quite remarkable. But Pékerman took up and, well, he instilled his ideas once again.
When he
Top level.
picked up, it was midway through the 2006 World Cup qualification campaign when he did
Yeah,
it. Yeah.
correct, correct. And he took up and he led them to the 2006 World Cup. Once again, he tried to incorporate his idea of Argentinian football, and that meant the incorporation of, well, you could say a foot on the ball playmaker, Riquelme. He'd known Riquelme for quite some time because Riquelme was originally, many people tend to forget that because now he's even president of Boca Juniors. But he was educated, he came up in Argentinian juniors as a youngster. So when I compare that to Peckerman's trajectory, I would say that they must have known each other from back then. Once again, he gave Riquelme the number 10 shirt to guide Argentina up front. And on YouTube, you see that game against Brazil where he played a fantastic first half, leading Argentina to a 3-0 lead. The game ended in 3-1 following Roberto Carlos free kick. But yeah, it was quite impressive to watch. And that was a Brazil team that was not to be underestimated, to say the least.
Like you said, he'd been a youth manager essentially for all his career. Now he had made a transition to the senior team. He would help qualify the team to the World Cup, the 2006 World Cup in Germany, and gave a debut to a certain Lionel Messi in
Yeah,
2005.
yeah.
How would you describe the team's performances and Peckerman's handling of the team in the 2006 World Cup?
Well, Argentina started fantastically, especially the second group game against Serbia Montenegro. I suppose everyone,
The six
um,
zero game, yes.
yeah, me, yeah, and special mention to the second goal, which was a string of 26 passes. Cambiasso being at the end of 26 passes, slotting it home. Yeah, it was quite remarkable. Earlier this week, I watched that game and with Dutch commentary, and the commentator at some point he was somewhat, yeah, he thought it was quite boring, quite a boring game. And Argentina was building up, and they were playing. They played the ball from foot to foot, and all of a sudden the pace increased with Riquelme and Saviola playing a 1-2. Crespo, who set up Cambiasso with a back heel. It was considered to be the most beautiful goal of the tournament, if I'm not mistaken. Justly so. And then they even played the Netherlands, but, well, qualification for the second round had already been secured. So I've never really looked into that game because, well, it
Yeah.
wasn't that important. Then they defeated Mexico, sudden death, courtesy of Maxi Rodriguez
Oh, yeah.
stunner. A wonderful first touch, and, well, he blasted it home with his left foot. Then they played against Germany, and, well, it was a tough game, but Germany would always be a tough game. They went up 1-0 following Riquelme corner, which was headed in by Roberto Ayala. And then Peckerman made a substitution, which made him infamous, I would say. He took off Riquelme. And in doing so, he more or less decapitated his team in terms of build up, in terms of fluidity. He thought he could defend the 1-0 by putting on Cambiasso. But in doing so, his team lost the ability to play football, really. Yeah, relying on defense only. But despite not overawing Germany, they were stronger. They were the better team. So I'm inclined to say that Peckerman gave that away. Is it a mistake? How many coaches have done that before? But when you rely on a player like that so heavily, it's always a risk to take him off. But that's a general statement, so it doesn't necessarily apply to Peckerman.
He would leave his post after the World Cup after such a short time in charge. I mean, it felt it was very sudden. What was the real story, you think?
Well, what I've found is that following the penalty shootout against Germany, which they lost and were eliminated as a result, but following that, a brawl broke out between
Right, right. Yeah, the players.
German and Argentinian players. He is said to be appalled by what happened because, well, apart from his football ideas, he would always say or always instill certain values in his team. He would always expect players to behave in a certain manner without having to rely to violence or fights on the pitch. That's not behavior he would condone. And it's said that, well, convinced him that he couldn't stay on much longer because that wasn't part of his values. But that's, well, I would almost say rumors because I've never heard him say it.
For the next few years, he worked in the Mexican leagues, managing clubs. How would you describe this phase of his career?
Well, he coached two clubs between 2008 and 2009, or 2007 and 2009. Well, he had coached two clubs by then, by the end of 2009. Both stints didn't last that long. So when he started, within 2 years, he'd already left two clubs, respectively, Toluca and Tigres. You can't regard that to be a success. You can't think that.
Yeah.
No, it's less than glorious to say the least.
In the end, his longest tenure was as manager of the Colombian national team from 2012 until 2018. How did he improve things and qualify the nation to two World Cups?
Well, it's quite impressive. When looking at the football pedigree of Colombia, it's quite impressive to see what he's done, what he did with the Colombian national team, because between 1990 and 1998, they were regulars in the 90s, one could say, but they missed out on World Cups in Japan, South Korea, Germany, and South Africa. So then somewhere along the line, he took up the national team in 2012. Well, he improved things in his fashion, in his way, a certain playing style, relying on a couple of players who could help the team. Among them, James Rodriguez, of course, the number 10, goalkeeper such as Ospina, well, the renowned striker Radamel Falcao, although he may well have been past his best because he suffered a serious knee injury somewhere
Yeah,
along the
just
line.
before the World Cup, he
Yeah,
suffered a very serious injury and missed
yeah.
out.
But back in 2012, of course, he was one of the guiding figures, so to speak. He was one of the figureheads of that team. Yeah, that's what Peckerman does, especially with national teams. He combines a few things: defensive solidity and attacking flair. And that's what he did with quite a degree of success. So he made sure they qualified for two World Cup tournaments, both in Brazil, the World Cup in 2014 and 2018 in Russia. The results were quarterfinal elimination in Brazil and a second round elimination after penalty kicks against England in Russia. Colombia became a force to be reckoned with. I would say the most successful, of course, was 2014 when Colombia went out in the quarterfinals. But James Rodriguez would end up being a top goal scorer, 6 goals. It's quite a harvest when considering the absence, the 16-year absence between 1998 and 2014. So that's it's quite an achievement. It's not a foregone conclusion that Colombia always qualifies. So and the fact that they offered him a Colombian citizenship, well, that speaks for itself.
In fact, you could say managing Colombia has been his greatest success. I
Yeah,
mean, like you said, for all the reasons you mentioned. Yeah.
yeah,
His last job has been as Venezuela's national team manager
yeah.
from 2021 to 2023. How did he do with much limited resources?
Venezuela were always considered to be minnows among giants, always having to compete with the world's best and their contenders. Because, well, Peru and Colombia, Ecuador, as we saw in the latest qualification for the World Cup in 2026, and even Bolivia at times. they're always ready to challenge Argentina, Chile, Uruguay, Brazil. They can always defeat them on a good day. The prowess of Venezuela in that regard is not that impressive. There would also always be some kind of punching bag for all the others, despite having some good results, but those were mere incidents rather than structural setups. That is something Pékerman also encountered. It showed by failing to qualify, failing to make an impression. He's a good coach, but he's not a magician.
Many of his under 20 graduates made the full Argentina national team with distinction. Who were the standouts? I imagine Riquelme would be on the top of the list.
Yeah, yeah. On the pitches would be you would have to mention Riquelme and Walter Samuel. Well, Walter Samuel was actually a mainstay in Cambiaso also. The latter two were actually mainstays because they came to Europe as youngsters. Cambiaso at 16 with some periods in Argentina on loan. He came back to Real Madrid and then had a long career at Inter. The zenith of that period of his career was, of course, a 2010 win in the Champions League against Bayern Munich. And if I'm not mistaken, Samuel was also there. That was quite impressive when you look at success. The acclaim, of course, is with Riquelme, who did something quite remarkable because, well, he was in charge of Boca, you could say, when they defeated Real Madrid in 2000. He was the epitome of the Boca Copa Libertadores winning teams in that period. I believe he also did it after he returned from Villarreal. He won it again. In South America, I would say people are more inclined to say that Riquelme is the biggest product. In Europe, we are more likely to focus on the others I mentioned, Samuel and Cambiaso. He played for Villarreal and he missed that penalty against Arsenal
Oh,
in the
yes.
semi-final, which sent Arsenal through to the final, really. In terms of playing, you would have to say that those three are the outstanding figures who would wear the legacy of Jose Pékerman.
And from his under 20 title winning sides, between 1997 or 2001, which one you think would be the better one?
In long-term success, I would say 1997. So how did they fare after the World Youth Championship? Because that was also Pékerman's final goal, to try and find these players and to groom them to become top flight, either internationals or players who can achieve worldwide acclaim. But in terms of results, on the spot, right on that moment, it was a 2001 crop because, well, what they did at that tournament, it's unsurpassed. Never happened before that. It never happened before that, and it hasn't happened since. Hasn't been emulated since. So that was quite an achievement on the spot. But when you look at the achievements of those players, what they did after that tournament, that was not so impressive.
Of course, we already kind of echoed this, but yeah, his tenure as Colombian national team manager, I think, would far eclipse the 2 years he spent as Argentina national team manager.
I
Uh,
have to agree with you there.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. He did something unsurpassed for Colombia. And of course, the Maturana era was something new. They played tiki taka and they trounced Argentina at home 0-5 at the hands of Valderrama, Asprilla, Rincon. But those were mere incidents. Whereas in the Pékerman era, they qualified for the tournament, they made a name for themselves, and they repeated it more or less in 2018. Less impressive, that is, but they were there and they took England to penalties. You could say that he was more successful then. Yeah.
In closing, what is the legacy of Peckerman's coaching legacy for Argentine football as well as world football in general?
When we look at the players we more or less played, we more or less talked about the players and, well, the legacy. When we look at, for instance, we focus on a Colombian perspective, it's obvious. I mean, he's highly respected for what he did there. He gave Colombia, could say, a footballing sense of pride. He demonstrated what could be achieved in Colombia. because it's not always a regularity. It's not always common for Colombia to qualify and to progress into further stages of a tournament. In Argentina, he is still respected for what he did. The youth teams that focuses on conduct, so how they behaved, and the style of play, which had a certain kind of fluidity, which had a certain quality to it. So, yeah, I think he's also well respected in Argentina. But as you said, considering what he did for Colombia, the respect there is of equal measure, if not even more. When we look at what he left as a coach, many of his pupils, you could say, are now in charge of the Argentina national teams. We've already mentioned Scaloni, but we shouldn't forget Aymar, Placente, Samuel, and even Bernardo Romeo, who played for HSV in his days. So you could say that it's twofold how Pékerman is viewed. In Europe, I think he's mainly viewed upon as the man who substituted his playmaker when it mattered, who did quite well with Colombia, because that can't be forgotten. But I think that's a European perspective. But locally, I think he has amassed quite a good reputation.
With that, I would like to thank you for your participation in this interview. All our respective contact information is listed on a blog and podcast uploads. So, Renee, thank you once again and hope to continue these discussions on football history. Thank you.
Thank you, Shahan. Thanks for having me. And thanks for giving me the opportunity to outline my findings on this particular person. Thank you.
Thank you.